Ah, the 80s. It was all big hair, double denim, and the Cold War. What a time it must have been to be alive. By all accounts, the 80s was a great time to be a video game fan though. The medium was in its relative infancy, and as such, new innovations were being made all the time. Exciting new consoles like the NES and the Sega Master System pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the home gaming sphere. Arcades were packed with kids and teens frittering away their pocket money, and the likes of Mario dominated the sales charts. It wasn't all good news though. Like every other decade in gaming history, the 80s had its fair share of digital duds. And for today's list, we're taking a look at the worst of the bunch. Once again, we've taken our tried and tested video game quality-o-meter out of storage and scanned every title released between 1980 and 1989 in order to find the horriblest, stinkiest, rubbishest games of the decade. Opinions here are our own, so if you don't agree, well, that's showbiz, baby. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games of the 1980s. Number 10. Journey Escape, 1982. If you were around in the 80s, or the late 2000s when the band enjoyed something of a resurgence, you will no doubt have heard of Journey, the San Franciscan rock group who are all about having things any way you want it. Considering the band's popularity in the 80s, it's fairly unsurprising they were deemed worthy of their own video game. And thus, in 1982, Journey Escape was released for the Atari 2600. The game focuses on the band themselves, and it's up to players to guide each of them to their Scarab escape vehicle whilst protecting them, and the cash from their previous concert, from rabid fans, paparazzi, and promoters. Oh, and for some reason, the Kool-Aid Man is the band's manager. I don't know what to tell you here. There were a lot of drugs floating around in the 1980s, that's all I'll say. Monotonous gameplay, a downright annoying soundtrack, and a weird points system that seemingly had no bearing on how well players had actually done were all reasons why Journey Escape simply wasn't worth loving, touching, or squeezing. Clearly though, fans weren't completely put off by Journey Escape, as another Journey game, simply titled Journey, surfaced in 1983. That one isn't very good either though, so maybe play the PS3 one instead. Number 9. Lost Luggage, 1982. Being on holiday is great. You get to enjoy lovely weather, exciting new food, and visit interesting and historic places. Going on holiday, on the other hand, is a pain in the neck. Being shoehorned into a flying tin can for hours on end, that mad rush you have to do going through security as you try and put your shoes back on, waiting for hours at baggage claim only to find that you're in France but your suitcase has gone to Burundi. Oh, it's all a nightmare. That said, at least you get a holiday at the end of it. We imagine it's far less fun being a baggage handler in an airport 5 days a week, lugging heavy cases around for your entire shift. So we're not sure why the good folks at Games by Apollo thought the job would make for a fun gaming experience. In Lost Luggage, players take control of a baggage handler and must catch wayward luggage before it falls to the ground. They'll start with 3 lives, each of which is lost if a suitcase hits the floor, and if they lose all 3, it's game over. Shallow and repetitive with a premise that's completely uninteresting, Lost Luggage is roughly as much fun as waiting in a 90-minute-long customs queue at Orlando International Airport. And yes, our writer is speaking from experience here. Do better, Orlando International Airport. Number 8. Hangman the Video Game, 1984. You know what's great about Hangman? The fact that as long as you've got a writing implement and a scrap of paper, you can play it anywhere, anytime. The thing about Hangman though is that it's generally only played by folks who have nothing else to do, and so if you have access to a whole arcade, it's highly unlikely that a digitized version of the boredom-busting word game would be the first thing you would shove your pennies into. This really is the crux of the issue with Hangman the video game. Who in their right mind would pay good money to play a game they could recreate for free? What's worse though is that Hangman the video game is an objectively inferior experience. By virtue of being a video game, there are only so many puzzles to solve, whereas in regular Hangman there are infinite possibilities. Plus, in Hangman the video game, you only get 4 wrong guesses, corresponding to the head, torso, arms, and legs, instead of the 10 or so you'd get in the pen and paper version. Unless you're the world's biggest Hangman fan, and even then you'd probably struggle to glean much fun out of Hangman the video game, we wouldn't recommend hanging around your local arcade waiting for this particular offering. Number 7. Back to the Future, 1989. It's your video game, Marty. Something's gotta be done about your video game. Anyway, sorry. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that Back to the Future and Back to the Future Part 2 are among the greatest films of all time, and I defy anyone to say that they didn't want a pair of those self-lacing Nikes when they first saw them on screen. Unfortunately though, the first movie's NES tie-in game, released in 1989, sits at the opposite end of the quality scale to its cinematic counterpart. Back to the Future for the NES is loosely based on the plot of the film, following Marty as he attempts to secure his own future. And no, we're not sure when in the movie Marty had to deal with angry bees or hula-hooping girls either. Must be a deleted scene or something. Back to the Future not only looks and sounds bad, but it's also horrendously difficult, and not in the fun Dark Souls sort of way, but more in the poorly designed gameplay and wonky controls sort of way. So bad is Back to the Future actually that Bob Gale, the film's screenwriter, called it one of the worst games ever and has repeatedly warned fans of the franchise not to buy it. Ouch. Number 6. The Evil Dead, 1984. Another movie tie-in for you now, and this one is an adaptation of the 1981 horror flick The Evil Dead, directed by Sam Raimi and starring the legendary Bruce Campbell. Like Back to the Future, The Evil Dead is another film with a huge fanbase and with an absolutely horrible video game attached to it as well. The Evil Dead: The video game takes place in the cabin from the film and sees Ash attempting to stop the Deadites from entering and dispatching them with various weapons if they do manage to get inside. The longer Ash fights, the more his energy depletes, but he can refuel himself by picking up new weapons. I know nothing perks me up like a shiny new shotgun. The issue with The Evil Dead is that it just lacks the excitement and atmosphere of its movie counterpart. Preventing monsties from entering by just closing windows doesn't really evoke the terror that we're sure the developers were hoping it would. Furthermore, the game doesn't really offer much beyond this, and whilst there is some fun to be had blasting monsties, it's really rather short-lived. Oh well, at least The Evil Dead wasn't the very worst movie tie-in game of the 1980s. We'll get to that a bit later. Number 5. Friday the 13th, 1989. These days, Atlus are known for producing some of the best games of all time, having created series like Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. At the tail end of the 80s, however, they were responsible for one of the worst movie tie-in video games of all time. Again, not the worst, I hasten to add. We will still come to that one a little bit later on. If you've seen any of the Friday the 13th movies, you'll know that they're famous for being dark, gory, and rather terrifying. And though they've gotten campier over the years, no pun intended, because of the summer camp in the first one, never mind, they've never been what you'd call bright and colourful. Not sure then who in their right mind over at Atlus thought the best way to represent the franchise in video game form was to make everything neon. Friday the 13th's problems don't end with its wonky visuals, though. The gameplay is frustrating and tremendously difficult, the music is repetitive to the point where it gets annoying, and it completely lacks any sort of atmosphere or scares. Trust us, you will be praying for Jason to burst through the screen, restrain you in a sleeping bag, and beat you to death long before the credits roll. Number 4. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1988. Robert Louis Stevenson's 1886 novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, is a universally beloved gothic horror tale of a bloke with two personalities. Its 1988 video game adaptation, on the other hand, is not so beloved. Players start the game by taking control of Dr. Jekyll and must guide him towards a church where he's set to marry Miss Millicent, his betrothed. However, on his journey, numerous things get in his way and his anger steadily rises. Should it reach its peak, Mr. Hyde will take over, the stage will flip horizontally, and chaos will ensue. It's then up to players to kill monsters as quickly as they can so that Hyde can revert back to his more amiable form. This all sounds fine, but the resulting game was nothing short of unplayable dross. Part of the issue is the gameplay itself. Players must appease Hyde's anger before they reach the point where Jekyll originally transformed, otherwise he gets zapped by lightning, making the whole thing a very tricky balancing act. It also looks horrid, even for a title of the time, and quite frankly, it's a horrible use of the characters. If anyone ever offers you the chance to play this game, run. Or better yet, hide. Number 3. Custer's Revenge, 1982. We're prefacing this entry with an advisory warning. Owing to the nature of this game, we'll be talking about some sensitive topics, namely SA, so if you'd rather not hear about that, please skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. We've seen some abhorrent games in our time here at Team TripleJump, but there are few that come close to 1982's Custer's Revenge. The aim of the game is to take control of a nude Lieutenant Colonel and Brevet Major General George Armstrong Custer, guide him across the stage, avoiding the litany of arrows being shot in his general direction, and then assault a Native American woman, earning points for each... You know what, I'm not even going to go into that level of detail, I'm sure you get the picture. As though not content with making violence towards women its core gameplay loop, Custer's Revenge is also diabolically racist, which only serves to make it twice as revolting. The premise alone makes Custer's Revenge one of the most repugnant video games of all time, which, considering its very rudimentary presentation, is almost impressive for want of a much better word, and there's little wonder it frequently tops the list of the worst and most vile games ever made. I sure hope that everyone who was involved in creating and distributing this feels truly ashamed of themselves. Number 2. Pac-Man, 1982. You'd think it would be quite difficult to get Pac-Man wrong, wouldn't you? Just program a little yellow chompy dude, some dots for him to munch on, a few ghosties to chase him, and the odd bit of fruit here and there, and bam! Pac-Man. If you did think that though, then clearly you are unfamiliar with Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, a game which is not only one of the worst of the 1980s and one of the worst of all time, but one which was so bad that it almost killed the Western games industry full stop. Whilst Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 technically functions, i.e. you get to eat dots and avoid ghosts, it looks absolutely atrocious. This is in large part due to the limitations of the Atari 2600 itself, as the game had to be programmed in such a way that all 4 ghosts never actually appear on screen at once, creating a horrible flickering effect that hurts the eyes after a while. Along with our next entry on this list, Pac-Man severely eroded consumers' confidence in Atari, and the result was a large-scale recession in the Western games industry that saw revenue drop by an eye-watering 97%. Still, whilst Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 was bad, it wasn't quite as bad as number 1, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, 1982. It was a bit of a toss-up whether to place E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial or Pac-Man in the number 1 spot. After all, they were both equally culpable for the video game industry crash of 1983. However, E.T. is the truly infamous one, and so into pole position it goes. The story of E.T. is quite the saga. We've done a whole video on the subject, in fact, but the headlines are thus. After E.T. the movie was released in 1982, Atari set about going after the rights to develop a video game tie-in. They secured these in July 1982, and the project was given to designer Howard Scott Warshaw, who was told to have the game finished by September. In all, he had just over 5 weeks to develop the game, and by Jove does it show. The gameplay is terribly dull and confusing, the graphics are basic, even for the early 80s, and the story, which sees E.T. looking for bits of a phone so he can contact his home planet, is rather uninspired at best. Although E.T. initially sold well, more than a quarter of purchased cartridges wound up getting returned, whilst millions more languished in warehouses. In the end, as the infamous story goes, and it is true by the way, Atari took all the unsold carts, along with many others, and buried them under several tons of concrete in the New Mexico desert, which to this day is still a hell of a way to deal with one of your biggest failures.